I need to move on to our next section, which is what some people think will be one of the key focuses of the budget, and that is social policy, social goals, particularly inequality, which has been a sort of big theme over the last couple of years. I think it's well known that Singapore is probably one of the more unequal societies in Asia. We have a Gini coefficient of 0.48, which is quite high. My question to you is, how can the tax system be tweaked to make it more equitable?
I think on one hand, right, we recognize that there's this inequality. How are we going to bridge that gap? And one of the simple ways is tax the rich or tax the higher income more. But from an optic perspective, right, that may not go down well, because the thing is that on the other hand, right, we are trying to attract top talent to Singapore. Okay, so I think that is also one thing that could possibly put policymakers, right, into this position, right, what I'm going to do. Okay, but on the other hand, right, I think that is only looking from the perspective of your take-home pay and the taxes. I think the other thing is that from a social aspect is that hospital or healthcare costs are going up. I think that is the part whereby it is putting a lot of pressure on especially the lower income group or even the middle income group.
Taxis and buses.
Yes. So those are the things that could possibly come into the equation. So it may not be a direct, right, remedy on tax to resolve that coefficient, but the thing is that it is more of how we can make, right, those goods and services that are necessary, right,
more affordable.
More affordable.
Yeah.
I think that is the part.
But you would not change the tax system at all. You would leave it as it is.
I think it's difficult because the thing is that if you were to move it in a way, it sends a signal, rightly or wrongly, to people outside Singapore and also to people in Singapore as well. And in fact, one of the things that was discussed is that we are always looking at taxes, predominantly taxes, to subsidize part of this social program. The question is that can we look at the NRI, the net investment return, or land sales to be channeled to help to pump more resources into this area, rather than just looking at taxes.
Or COEs, or cigarette tax, or alcohol tax.
What do you think, Vishnu? What do you think the government can do to reduce inequality in the budget?
Well, I think before I start on that, I just want to go back and contradict a point, or at least bring up one point. Earlier we were saying we want to reduce cost of compliance, so on and so forth. But I think in trying to make the budget more equitable, in doing more transfers and making it more targeted, there will be a certain compliance cost. So it's a give and take. These two, I think there's always going to be some push and pull. And then when you go to the budget, I think everyone has brought up the best points available, which is really the cost of living. So one of the issues we brought up long ago is that we perhaps need to look at it from a demographics point of view as well. I mean, we've got one of the most quickly aging populations in Asia. Average age is 38, 39 now, before we know it. So healthcare was one of the very crucial costs that brought up. And the other thing is that you've got a GST policy. GST usually encourages savings, but you know that the demographics means that people will be drawing down on savings. So inevitably GST rates will go up. In doing so, and if we know we are going to hit 10%, perhaps 12% at some point, like most OECD countries do, then we need to ask ourselves, do we want to apply a standard rate? Because then you should have some GST exempt items like your basic necessities like rice.
But you have GST offsets.
Yes, that's right. I mean, that's a transfer program.
Yeah.
That's great. But that is going to depend on what is going to come from the budget or what the government would decide. Whereas if it's inherent in the system, it somewhat increases transparency.
Okay.
And one of the things that was brought up rightly was that maybe the transfer need not be publicly administrated. It could be donations, so on and so forth. But in that whole issue of things, I think one of the things we need to consider as we look up 20, 30 years is whether we need to re-establish things like estate duties. We've got on a limited
But they just remove them.
Exactly. But then if you look at the demographics, you've got a fertility rate that's lower at 1.1, and you've got demographics that's quickly aging. What that does is it concentrates property and wealth. And that's not going to help the Gini coefficient in 20, 30 years. I'm not talking about 2-3 years.
Okay.
But from a broader point of view, social mobility is important.
Yes.
And that needs to be translated in policy as well.